So picture this. You've carved out your niche, you're making waves in your field, contributing to our understanding of the world, and then bam, the rug is pulled out from under you.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling to think about.
That's exactly the kind of shock that Badar Khan Suri, a peace studies fellow at Georgetown University, experienced recently.
Wow.
Try to imagine being on the verge of deportations from the U.S.
Right.
The accusation, alleged links to Hamas.
That's pretty serious.
It sounds like a plot twist from a political thriller, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But for Suri, this is very real.
I see.
So today we're taking a deep dive into this situation. A researcher facing removal over these accusations of terrorist ties. The legal move that, thankfully, put a stop to that. And the big question, what does it all say about the space for academic work? For expressing views that might not exactly be universally loved? Our goal today is for you to walk away understanding the nuts and bolts of this story, the arguments from both sides, and why it should matter to you.
Right.
We'll be pulling from news reports and statements from those directly involved to try to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
I think that's a great approach.
So to jump right in, it's pretty jarring, right?
Yeah.
Someone dedicated to peace studies, trying to find ways to build bridges in conflict zones.
Yeah, I can see that.
Suddenly they're caught up in this web of national security concerns.
It makes you wonder, what's the process here?
Yeah.
What's the information they're working with? What's the rationale behind such a drastic action?
Exactly. And just as Suri's removal seemed like a done deal, the legal system intervened.
Okay.
Judge Patricia Tolliver-Giles issued this order, and it wasn't messing around.
Yeah.
It effectively halted his deportation. To simplify it, she basically said Suri wasn't going anywhere unless her court decided otherwise.
Wow, so that's a pretty significant legal check.
Right.
I mean, it shows that the court, or at least this judge, saw enough vague flags to pause the process. Hold on, we need a closer look at what's going on here.
Absolutely. And Suri's lawyers didn't mince words in their response. They called his detention targeted and retaliatory.
That's heavy.
Yeah, suggesting that, in their view, this wasn't truly about national security, but rather a reaction to his views or his associations.
I see.
They argued that the whole point was to silence him.
So when we say national security concerns, we're talking about stuff that the government sees as a threat to the country, right?
Yeah, to the safety of its citizens, to the well-being of the nation.
But this case really makes you think about that line between protecting national interests and protecting free speech. Where does one end and the other begin?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, and the lawyer's statement really hits on that.
Exactly.
Where's the boundary between expressing an opinion, even if it's not popular, and actually doing something dangerous?
Right.
And how do we make sure that line isn't crossed for the wrong reasons?
The ACLU also jumped in with some pretty strong words. They called it a blatant effort to shut down dissent. One of their representatives, Sophia Gregg, even implied that it was politically motivated.
So this goes beyond just one person's situation. This has implications for everyone's free speech.
Right.
Especially for people who challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And think about academics. The idea of academic freedom, being able to research and teach without fear of censorship or backlash, even if your ideas are controversial, this case puts that to the test.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the ACLU going straight to the First Amendment issue, that tells you a lot.
Right.
They're framing this as a case where someone might be targeted for their political beliefs. And that makes us think, are the actions taken against Suri in line with those fundamental rights?
Okay, so let's rewind for a second. What were the reasons given for this attempted deportation?
Right.
Well, a DHS spokeswoman, Tricia McLaughlin, offered some explanations. She said Suri was actively spreading Hamas propaganda and promoting anti-Semitism on social media. And she also claimed he had close connections to a known or suspected terrorist who's a senior advisor to Hamas.
Wow, those are some very serious allegations.
Yeah, they really are.
And, if we're trying to get to the bottom of this, we need to understand what they mean by spreading Hamas propaganda.
Yeah.
Is it sharing certain articles? Is it expressing certain political viewpoints? What does it even mean?
Exactly.
And close connections, what does that entail?
Right.
Is it personal, professional, something else entirely?
Yeah.
Without those details, it's hard to really judge how serious these claims are.
This is where things get a little puzzling.
Okay.
Suri's area of expertise, his academic focus, is peace building in Iraq and Afghanistan. Think about what that involves.
Yeah.
Understanding conflict, trying to find ways to bridge divides in incredibly complex and volatile regions.
It's a very specific field.
And then to be accused of promoting terrorism elsewhere.
It's a little strange.
It just feels so out of sync,
Yeah, I get it.
Imagine accusing a master pastry chef, known for their exquisite desserts,
Okay.
of secretly running a counterfeiting operation in their kitchen.
That's a good analogy.
The two just don't seem to fit together.
No, they don't. It really makes you question the connection between his work and the accusations.
And it wasn't just us scratching our heads.
Right.
Georgetown University, Suri's employer, released a statement that's really telling. They confirmed he was in the U.S. on a valid visa, doing legitimate research in peace building.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. They said, and I quote, "We are not aware of him engaging in any illegal activity, and we have not received a reason for his detention."
Wow, so the university that brought him here that's familiar with his work, they have no idea why he's being detained.
Right. It really points to a lack of transparency in this whole process.
Yeah, and that raises some serious due process concerns.
Exactly.
If the university sponsoring his visa doesn't even know the reason, what information is the government basing this on?
Right.
And has Suri even had a chance to understand and respond to the accusations?
And it seems like this might not be an isolated incident.
Really?
Around the same time as Suri's case, there was another similar situation.
Okay.
A French space scientist was traveling to a conference in Houston. They were detained, their devices were searched, and they were ultimately expelled from the U.S.
Wow.
The reason given:
What was it?
authorities found hateful messages against U.S. policy on their devices.
So not terrorism, but still expressing critical views.
Right, and being punished for it.
So this is a bit of a pattern then.
It seems so.
Increased scrutiny, less tolerance for opinions that the government doesn't like.
Exactly.
And this is happening in academia and professional circles. That's really worrying.
Now, this is where the story takes a bit of a complicated turn.
Okay.
Court filings suggest a theory that Suri's detention might be linked to his wife.
His wife.
She's a U.S. citizen of Palestinian descent, and they're both suspected of opposing U.S. policy on Israel.
So we're getting into some really sensitive territory here.
Right.
Political views, national security, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
It's a very complex mix.
Yeah, and it raises the possibility that Suri's connections, his family's political views, might have triggered this whole thing.
Let's try to connect the dots as we see them now.
Okay.
Suri, a researcher focusing on peace in conflict zones.
Right.
He's arrested without, as far as we know, formal charges being publicly disclosed.
Okay.
The government labels him a national security threat.
Uh-huh.
His wife is a U.S. citizen with Palestinian heritage, and they're suspected of dissenting from U.S. policy on Israel.
I see.
You know, it's hard to ignore the potential for guilt by association here.
Yeah, I can see that.
Even though, legally speaking, that's a very shaky argument.
Uh-huh.
We have to be careful about assuming causation from correlation.
Right, we don't have direct evidence linking his wife's views to his detention.
But the timing, the nature of the accusations, it raises these questions.
It does, and even though we don't have proof of motive, these factors make us wonder about the influence of political considerations here.
It all comes back to that balancing act
Yeah.
between national security and individual rights.
Exactly.
The right to hold dissenting political views.
Especially when those views are about something as sensitive as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
You know, this whole situation goes beyond just Suri. It touches on academic freedom, political dissent, the power of the government.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What's happening to him could have a ripple effect.
Right. Other researchers, academics, if their work or opinions are seen as controversial, they might think twice.
Exactly.
They might not pursue certain topics. They might not speak their minds.
We've seen this before.
Yeah.
Surveillance, the fear of consequences, it can lead to self-censorship.
And that limits the kind of research that gets done.
Absolutely, especially on sensitive issues.
Like peace studies, political science, international relations, those are all areas that could be really affected by this.
It's encouraging, though, to see Georgetown University take a stand.
Okay.
They came out strongly in support of free and open inquiry, deliberation, and debate, even if the underlying ideas may be difficult, controversial, or objectionable.
That's a pretty powerful statement in this context.
Right.
I mean, universities should be places where you can explore challenging ideas without fear.
That's the whole point of academia.
Yeah, that stance from Georgetown is really important.
It is.
It reaffirms academic freedom, the idea that intellectual progress requires diverse, even uncomfortable perspectives.
And that commitment from the university is essential for critical thinking, for advancing knowledge.
Absolutely.
So where do we stand now?
Right. What's the current situation?
Thanks to Judge Giles' order, Suri is still in the U.S.,
Okay.
but this isn't over.
Yeah, it feels like this story is just getting started.
There are legal challenges underway, and we don't know what the government will do next.
Right.
This whole thing is a real nail-biter.
Yeah, the legal proceedings will likely get into the nitty-gritty.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence, the reasons for the detention, and the attempted deportation.
Right.
And, of course, the arguments about free speech and due process.
The outcome of this case could have a big impact on how the U.S. government handles similar situations in the future.
Yeah, especially when national security, academic research, and political views all collide.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I think the key takeaway is this.
Uh-huh.
We have this intricate web of allegations, legal battles, and unanswered questions surrounding a peace studies researcher who almost got deported for alleged ties to terrorism.
It's a lot to unpack.
And it really highlights the delicate balance between national security and individual rights,
Especially the freedom of thought and expression.
especially in academia.
This case really forces us to think about a big question.
Okay.
In a democratic society, how do we balance national security with the protection of dissenting voices?
It's a tough question.
And what happens to the free exchange of ideas if these kinds of cases become more common?
That's something for all of us to consider. It's not just about Suri. It's about the future of open dialogue and academic freedom.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind as this story unfolds.
Absolutely.